The day the broke single dad knelt at the grave, he wasn't praying for money or miracles, he was begging for time. Time to explain to his little girl why her shoes had holes again. Time to apologize to a woman who could no longer hear him. Time to understand how life had collapsed so completely when he had tried so hard to do everything right. He didn't notice the black luxury car stop behind him. He didn't hear the gravel crunch under expensive shoes. All he felt was the weight of a past he couldn't fix, until a calm, unfamiliar voice spoke his name and said something that froze him where he knelt. Ethan Miller pressed his forehead to the cold marble headstone that read, Lena Miller, beloved wife and mother. His jacket was thin, his hands cracked from warehouse work, and his bank account sat at $12.47. He had lost his job 3 days earlier when the company downsized. He hadn't told anyone, not his daughter, not his landlord, not even the grave he visited every Sunday. 6-year-old Sophie was at home with a neighbor, coloring pictures of castles and heroes, still believing her dad could fix anything. Ethan wished he believed that too. I'm sorry, he whispered to the grave. I tried. I swear I tried. Lena had died 2 years ago after a sudden illness. No warning. No goodbye. Just a hospital room full of machines and promises Ethan couldn't keep. Since then, every day felt like running uphill while carrying someone else's grief, his daughter's, his own, and the echo of a woman who had once believed in him without question. That was when the voice came again, closer now. You kept that promise better than you think. Ethan stiffened. He hadn't heard footsteps. Slowly, he turned. A tall man stood a few feet away, wearing a dark coat that looked worth more than Ethan's car, back when he had one. Silver hair, sharp eyes, calm posture. Not a cemetery worker. Not family. A stranger who looked completely out of place among cracked stones and fallen leaves. I'm sorry, Ethan said, embarrassed, wiping his face. The cemetery's open to everyone. The man nodded. I know. I came to see Lena too. Ethan's heart skipped. Did you know her? The man looked at the grave for a long moment. Better than she ever told you. Something about the way he said it made Ethan's stomach tighten. Who are you? The man reached into his coat, not for a weapon, but for a folded paper. He handed it over gently. My name is Richard Hale. Ethan stared. The name hit him like ice water. Richard Hale. Billionaire investor. Tech empire founder. One of the richest men in the country. Sophie had once pointed him out on TV and said, Daddy, that man looks like a king. This isn't funny, Ethan said quietly. I don't joke about graves, Richard replied. Ethan looked again at the paper. It was an old photograph, Lena, younger, smiling nervously, standing beside Richard Hale. Her arm wasn't around him. It was around someone else, someone cropped out. She was my daughter, Richard said. The world tilted. Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came. He looked back at the grave, then at the man, then at the photo. That's not possible. Lena said her parents died when she was young. Richard's jaw tightened. She thought it was better that way. Silence stretched between them, thick and heavy. Ethan felt something inside him crack open, not anger, not fear, but confusion so deep it hurt. Why are you here now? He asked. Richard knelt down beside the grave, despite the dirt, despite the cost of his clothes. Because I found out too late. And because I wanted to see the man who raised my granddaughter alone, without ever asking for help. Ethan swallowed hard. I didn't know. I know, Richard said softly. That's why I'm not angry. They stood there together for a long time, two men bound by the same woman, divided by years of silence. When Richard finally stood, he said, I've watched you, Ethan. Not closely. Not until recently. You work hard. You show up. You kneel here every Sunday. Ethan laughed bitterly. Doesn't pay the bills. No, Richard agreed. But it builds something far more rare. He paused, then said the words that would echo in Ethan's mind for weeks. You don't need my money. You need my respect. And you already have it. Ethan felt frozen, not by wealth, but by recognition. Someone had seen him. Truly seen him. The next morning, everything changed, and not in the way Ethan expected. The hook that pulled him forward wasn't a check or a contract. It was a knock at his door, followed by a question that forced him to choose between pride and his daughter's future. When Ethan opened the door, Richard Hale stood there again, holding a small pink backpack with a unicorn keychain. Sophie peeked from behind Ethan's leg, eyes wide. Who's that, Daddy? Richard smiled gently. May I come in? The apartment was small, 2 rooms, peeling paint, a heater that barely worked. Richard didn't comment. He sat at the tiny table like it was a boardroom. I won't insult you with charity, Richard said. I won't buy your silence or your gratitude. Ethan crossed his arms. Then why are you here? Because Sophie deserves to know where she comes from, Richard said. And because you deserve a choice. He slid a folder across the table. Inside wasn't money. It was an offer, a job managing a foundation Lena had secretly started years ago, funded anonymously, helping families like theirs. Families that fell through the cracks. She never told me, Ethan whispered. She didn't want praise, Richard said. She wanted impact. Ethan felt tears burn his eyes, not from pain this time, but from pride. Lena hadn't just loved him. She had believed in him. I don't know if I can do this, Ethan said honestly. Richard nodded. Good. That means you'll do it right. Outside, Sophie laughed, chasing a stray cat. Ethan watched her and understood the truth at last. He hadn't failed. He had survived. He had loved. And now, he had been seen, not as a broke man kneeling at a grave, but as a father standing tall in the hardest chapter of his life. And sometimes, the richest gift isn't money at all, it's the moment someone looks at you and says, you mattered all along. Ethan didn't sleep that night. The folder lay unopened on the kitchen table, like a quiet promise he was afraid to touch. Every few minutes he glanced at Sophie's bedroom door, listening to her soft breathing, wondering how much of her life had already been shaped by sacrifices she was too young to understand. Pride told him to push the folder away. Reality told him pride wouldn't keep the lights on. At dawn, he finally opened it. Inside were letters written in Lena's handwriting. Ethan's hands trembled as he read the first one. If you're reading this, it means I wasn't brave enough to tell you myself. I'm sorry for that. I didn't want my past to become a burden on our future. My father is powerful, yes, but power has a way of deciding who you're allowed to love. I chose you anyway. I chose our life. I chose Sophie. Tears blurred the page. Each letter revealed a part of Lena he had never known, not secrets born of shame, but of protection. She had walked away from privilege to build something real with him. She had never regretted it. By the time the sun rose, Ethan knew one thing clearly: whatever he chose next would honor her, not erase her. Later that day, he walked into Richard Hale's glass tower of an office feeling like he didn't belong. Polished floors. Silent elevators. People who moved fast and spoke softly, like the world bent for them. Ethan's worn boots echoed louder than he liked. Richard was waiting by the window, city stretched beneath him like a map he had already conquered. You came, Richard said. I didn't come for money, Ethan replied. I came for answers. Richard gestured for him to sit. Then ask. Ethan took a breath. Why now? Why not when Lena was alive? Richard didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was stripped of authority. Because I thought control was love. And I was wrong. By the time I realized it, she was already gone. That honesty changed something between them. I won't let Sophie grow up confused, Ethan said firmly. She doesn't need a billionaire. She needs stability. Richard nodded. Then let me earn my place. Not as her savior. As her grandfather. The word felt heavy. Grandfather. Ethan pictured Sophie holding Richard's hand, two worlds colliding. Fear rose, but so did hope. Weeks passed. Slowly, carefully, life began to shift. Ethan took the foundation role, not as an employee, but as a partner. He worked long hours, helping families facing eviction, medical bills, broken systems he knew too well. Every story mirrored his own in some way. Sophie started asking questions. Daddy, why does Grandpa Richard have so many books? Ethan smiled. Because he's still learning. One evening, Ethan returned to the cemetery alone. He knelt again, but this time, his shoulders felt lighter. I didn't know how strong you were, he whispered to the grave. But I'm trying to be. Behind him, Richard stood quietly, not intruding. Just present. Neither man spoke. They didn't need to. Because grief doesn't disappear, it transforms. And love, when finally seen, has a way of turning broken knees into steady feet and silence into second chances. And as Ethan stood, he understood the truth that had taken him years to learn: being broke never made him weak. Kneeling never made him small. And the moment someone truly saw his worth, it changed everything. Life didn't suddenly become easy just because doors had opened. In some ways, it became harder. Ethan learned that hope carries its own weight, the fear of losing it again. The foundation grew quickly under his guidance, and with growth came scrutiny. People whispered that he was only there because of Richard Hale. Others said he was a charity case in a suit that didn't quite fit. Ethan heard every word. He carried them home like invisible bruises. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep clutching her favorite stuffed bear, Ethan sat alone at the kitchen table and stared at his phone. A message blinked on the screen from an unknown number: "You don't belong in that world. Walk away before you embarrass yourself." His chest tightened. Old doubts clawed back, the same ones that had followed him since the warehouse, since the layoffs, since the grave. Maybe he was out of place. Maybe he had mistaken opportunity for destiny. The next morning, he arrived at the foundation early and found Richard already there, sleeves rolled up, sorting files. "You ever feel like you're wearing someone else's life?" Ethan asked quietly. Richard didn't look up. "Every day. The difference is, I hid behind money. You never did." That answer steadied him more than any speech could. The real test came weeks later. A large donor threatened to pull funding unless Ethan was replaced by a more polished executive. The board panicked. Numbers mattered. Optics mattered. Ethan sat through the meeting listening to people discuss his future like he wasn't in the room. Finally, he stood. "I won't beg for a seat I didn't steal," he said, voice calm but firm. "I built this work from lived pain. If that makes you uncomfortable, then maybe discomfort is what this foundation needs." Silence followed. The donor left. For a moment, Ethan thought it was over, that he had just ruined everything. Then one board member slowly began to clap. Another followed. Richard didn't clap. He simply met Ethan's eyes and nodded, pride unmistakable. That night, Sophie asked, "Daddy, why do some people look sad even when they have everything?" Ethan knelt in front of her, just like he had knelt at the grave. "Because sometimes they forget what everything is." Later, as Ethan tucked her in, he realized something had shifted inside him. He wasn't standing on borrowed ground anymore. He was standing on truth. The next Sunday, Ethan returned to the cemetery, not out of desperation, but gratitude. He placed fresh flowers on Lena's grave and spoke softly. "I stopped asking why you left," he said. "I started asking what you left behind." The wind moved through the trees like a quiet answer. As he walked away, Ethan understood that dignity isn't given by wealth, and belonging isn't granted by permission. They're built, slowly, painfully, by choosing courage when walking away would be easier. And somewhere between loss and love, Ethan had finally found his place, not as a man rescued by a billionaire, but as a father who rose on his own feet, carrying his past with him, not beneath him. The first time Ethan truly felt afraid again, it had nothing to do with money. Sophie collapsed at school during recess. The call came in the middle of a meeting. Ethan's phone buzzed once, then again, and something in his chest told him this wasn't ordinary. By the time the school nurse finished explaining, Ethan was already on his feet, words blurring together: fainted, ambulance, precaution. He drove like he used to when Lena was sick, hands tight on the wheel, heart louder than the engine, memory screaming that life could change in a breath. At the hospital, Sophie lay small and pale on the bed, eyes fluttering open when she heard his voice. "I'm okay, Daddy," she whispered, brave in the way only children can be. Tests followed. Waiting followed. Hours that stretched like years. The doctor finally sat them down. Nothing immediately life-threatening, but something wasn't right. A condition that needed monitoring. Specialists. Time. Ethan nodded, asked questions, did everything a good father does. But inside, fear pressed down hard. Not the fear of bills this time, but of being powerless. That evening, Richard arrived at the hospital quietly. No entourage. No announcements. Just a man walking fast down a hallway, worry written plainly on his face. "This isn't something money fixes," Ethan said before Richard could speak. "I know," Richard replied. "That's why it scares me." For the first time, Ethan saw Richard not as a billionaire, not even as Lena's father, but as a man who had already buried one child and couldn't bear the thought of almost losing another piece of her. Weeks passed in cautious routines, doctor visits, adjusted schedules, careful optimism. Sophie hated feeling different. One night, she asked in a small voice, "Did I do something wrong?" Ethan pulled her close. "No, sweetheart. Sometimes bodies just need extra care. Like hearts." The words stayed with him. At the foundation, Ethan started a new initiative: support for families dealing with childhood health issues. Not announced with press releases, not named after donors. Just help, quietly offered. Richard backed it without condition. One afternoon, while reviewing applications, Ethan found a letter from a father who sounded painfully familiar. "I'm scared I'll fail my kid. I'm scared I already have." Ethan leaned back, eyes burning. He wrote a response himself. Not as a director. As a dad. That night, he returned to the grave again, but he didn't kneel this time. He stood. "I'm still scared," he admitted. "But I'm not alone anymore. And she's not either." The sky darkened, then cleared, stars peeking through like small promises. Sophie's condition stabilized. Not cured. Not perfect. But manageable. Life went on, not smoother, but deeper. And Ethan realized something profound: strength wasn't the absence of fear. It was choosing love while afraid. As he walked home with Sophie's small hand in his, he felt it clearly: the journey hadn't ended at the grave. It had begun there. And every step since had been proof that even a broke man on his knees could grow into someone who stands steady when it matters most.